Well, hey guys, how's it going tonight? Everyone having a good couple days here. Uh Thanks for joining me tonight on another live broadcast. We actually did one of these live broadcasts a few weeks ago. What was that one? I'm trying to remember what we did with that one. It was an interesting broadcast. I think we were talking about the new film, A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, which I'm sure you've all seen, which is very interesting. We'll talk about again in a moment. But anyway, it's nice to see you here. We've got Greg, Sebastian, hey Renee, James, and Greg. Hey Greg, how you doing? So Greg was in the most recent remote viewing class, our beginning class that ended just a few weeks ago. We had a lot of fun. We made a lot of good target contact. And as you guys know, I mean, my bent on these subjects is that there's just a lot of overlap. I think all the evidence suggests there is a lot of overlap between these subjects. And anyway, guys, feel free to, this is our sort of Thanksgiving show. Even if you're not in the United States, we're having Thanksgiving for you too. So feel free to chat away. I'm going to look at the chat more than I usually do. And what I wanted to do tonight was talk about all these freaking Bigfoot conferences I've been to starting in June. It has been so fascinating. And I have met so many interesting witnesses. I just had to, talk about this, guys. Oh, we've got Janice there. Janice, thanks. Janice is the one I have to blame for getting me started in a lot of this. I actually have known Janice and Bruce since they took my RV class in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Good old squatchy Idaho. It's almost like there's Bigfoot in every corner of Idaho. And if you look at the BFRO sites or Becky Cook's book, Bigfoot Lives in Idaho. She has like 6 of these. Bigfoot still lives in Idaho. And it's just one corner of Idaho after another. It's fascinating. And I was over visiting with Janice once, and Janice and Bruce, and they were just, I didn't even know about Sasquatch Chronicles back then. I knew very little about the subject a couple of years ago. That's when I started doing all this research, and when I came across all of these weird freaking paranormal effects that a lot of witnesses encounter around Bigfoot. And that's when I started making a connection to a lot of these other subjects that I've been studying for, since the late 90s, like especially crop circles. I mean, who would have ever thought that there was any connection between crop circles and Bigfoot? Hey, Short Order Cook. Thanks, Dad. Great having you here, Michael. Hi there. Thanks for coming back. Yeah, so as you guys know, since this is a live broadcast, we encountered a lot of weird effects around crop circles, non-ordinary electromagnetic effects. And even when we started making them after a while, like after around 2000 or so, we still got some of these effects in our own crop circles. You've all seen that one from Kansas, maybe I'll pull it up later. Where there's weird blurry effects and everything. Blurry, yes, double exposed on a very professional Nikon FE3 camera, I believe, that Ron was using. A camera that never makes mistakes, according to Ron. And here it is, everything's blurred, every single shot. In the one that we make, it's pretty small, coming back from the RV conference in Austin, Texas in 2002 in Hayes. And that's where Ingo was for the first time, by the way. It's the first time that Ingo gave a public presentation, for a public presentation at one of the RV conferences. And yet here we make this and it's just blurry and weird well, this is now, we know, part parcel of phenomena that are based on fractal electromagnetic fields, where the energy, okay, I'm just going to show one slide here. This is begging to be shown. I think it's this one. Yes! From Dark Matter Monsters, fractal electromagnetic field structures discovered by the Soviets. I think these like KGB science experiments that they were doing back then in non-ordinary electromagnetics. And they found that this sort of structure, you can kind of see magnetic, and then it's the H and the E are the magnetic and electrical fields. And normally, you know, in the way we're taught about it, it's just these 90-degree pointing vectors. Everything's at 90 degrees. Wow, what the heck was that? That was weird. I saw balloons there. That was a non-ordinary thing. The fields we're taught about are just ordinary Euclidean. Everything's at 90 degrees. The magnetic fields and the electrical fields are always orthogonal. They're always at 90 degrees to each other. But what the Soviet-Russian research found was that you could create ball lightning in a lab if you had fractal electromagnetic fields, where the rings, there are smaller rings on top of the rings, and the rings even have smaller rings all the way down, as they said, to the 0-point field, based on none other than the Koch snowflake fractal formation, which was actually the basis of my dissertation, thank you very much, in like 1990. This kind of Koch snowflake, it just gets small, you know, triangles and then more triangles on top of the triangles. It kind of forms a six-sided snowflake formation. Actually, the first crop circle I ever went in by Silbury Hill was this Koch snowflake crop circle. I mean, when I studied it, it was this big in a book. To save printer ink, they left out the center. And here it was the size of a football field. And now we find out, as Zverbelis and Nevesky found, and Zverbelis, I have to tell you, he says in this paper about ball lightning, lab created, and this is thanks to Bob Greenyer, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, who found this. They were sent this paper from the Russian ball lightning scientific community. When Zverbelis discovered this structure, and this is his rendition of what he saw in that classified program lab, which he first had thought was a hoax, because, guys, how often have you ever turned off a light bulb and it just keeps glowing for 2 days? Which is what Zverbelis found. You could remove the equipment, this coiling structure, you can see windings on windings. You need at least, I think, 3 levels of these windings. And when they turned off the switch pulled out the plug to the AC outlet and removed the equipment, these coils, you still had the glow on the tabletop for 2 days. Natural ball lightning. Or what I think, in Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, Bob Greenyer, I agree. It seems, why not just simplify it? It seems like all the same sort of thing. And he at first thought it was a hoax. He tried to find people who had known about it, and got this mathematician Nevesky, who said this is a fractal pattern based on the Koch snowflake. And this creates intensified electromagnetic fields facing inward. Guys, we were not taught about this. This is what's missing entirely from Western science, which is why nobody understands any of the paranormal phenomena. And I would say, I'm not trying to be egotistical here, but I think we do. It's from these condensed fractal non-Maxwellian electromagnetic fields. Oh, hey, Jules is here. Thanks, Jules, for coming from the southeastern U.S. We've got Rob. Rob, how are you doing? All the way from Australia, from down under. Thank you so much for attending, Rob. Now, Jules is the moderator here. That's why you see the little wrench mark there. She's the only moderator, and if you don't behave, she can censor you. And you do not want this to happen. So, be on your best behavior, or Jules will enforce the law around here. And I'm not the law around here. Jules is the law. Okay. Hey, hello, Dominic. So we've got Dominic here. Now, Dominic is one of the longest standing friends I've had in my life. I have known Dominic since kindergarten, guys. 5 years old. I see Dominic when I go back to visit mom in New York. We just saw each other during Halloween, which is always fun to get together with Dom. Now, this is really interesting. I got to tell you this. Dom and I, for some reason, did not connect for about 20 years. It happens with people you knew from grade school and high school, right? You've all experienced it. For some reason, we get together again, we start contacting each other, and we've been studying the same subjects. He knew every single UFO case that I had learned about since the 90s. It was weird. We both grew up in the Hudson Valley area, and guys, the only thing I could conclude here is both Dominic and I were exposed to something there, even though we didn't know it as kids, that got us interested in these subjects. Now, when I did read Linda Zimmerman's book about Hudson Valley UFOs, it turned out that there was one sighted near his house in Westchester. But, it's just interesting that after all this time, we still had the same interest. So we get together and talk, and he's on the same page as we are, but I've known him for, 55 years. Can you believe it? So hi, Dom. Dom knows just everything about these subjects, and he's learned it just as well as anybody else. And that's what 55 years can do for your knowledge. So anyway, guys, this is the electromagnetic phantom that Zverbelis saw in that Moscow basement. And I encourage you to look up this paper. It's called The Bagel Game. I don't know why the top isn't displaying here. But the Bagel Game, because it's sort of like this bagel formation, like toroidal shapes. And if you want to learn about magnetic toroids and the science behind fractal toroidal shapes, which is, in my view, now the key to all of this, and we're based around those shapes too. You can look at this paper or the MFMP site and Bob's videos, which he does many about this and how it's linked to cold fusion and other subjects. For me, this explained a lot about the subjects we're interested in. And I think if it was classified in the Soviet Union, I would assume it's also been classified in the US. The evidence for that being is that before we get on to Bigfoot, I'm going to tell you about these conferences in a second. They were wild. The evidence being that Air Force report on ball lightning from 2003 by Eric Davis. The Air Force hires Eric Davis, one of Hal Puthoff's colleagues, to do a review on what we know about ball lightning. And if you look at that, you can search for it. It's from the Air Force Research Lab, and it's a very competent paper, very good review of the literature. It has all the references you want to read about if you're interested in ball lightning, going back hundreds of years. Walter Brand from 1923, and I think an excellent review is in this book. Which is, I'm afraid I think I got the last inexpensive copy on Amazon. It was not very much, and now they seem to be a lot. These guys really go through a review of the literature too. Anyway, here's why I think we don't know a lot about this before we start talking about Bigfoot here. I think we don't know a lot about this because there are definitive gravitational implications of condensed matter ball lightning like this. And I think the Air Force, they redacted half of the Eric Davis paper. Why would something, if it's just an atmospheric phenomena, which is obviously from the Zverbelis and Nevesky paper, we can see it can be produced in the lab. And Hank Urin's done this with the Vega experiments that Bob Greenyer talks about, and others. David Boutillier in Canada has produced these ball lightnings in their lab experiments, just like John Hutchinson in Canada reproducing Tesla's experiments, which is what got Ken Shoulders involved. But half of this paper is whited out of this Air Force paper on ball lightning, guys. Ball lightning. That must, and if you look at the type of classification, and I learned this from John Greenwald at the Black Vault, he's really into these documents and getting FOIA requests, and he's gone through what some of these different classifications mean. Now, when I looked up Uniform Federal Code Section 130, it seemed to have something to do with specific specifications relating to equipment and experiments. So it seems as if it has to do with the types of experiments and revealing what we're capable of doing or not. I don't know, but half the papers whited out, not blacked out, whited out, like Stanton Friedman used to joke about. They changed the pen from black to white somewhere a couple decades ago. So the point is, we don't know a lot about this. And there's a very interesting resource I came across on Unsicker's physics channel. I forgot, Alexander Unsicker has a channel of criticizing modern physics for being too practical and not theoretical enough, going back to the Einstein and Dirac and all the people that invented it, and looking a little deeper than we usually do. And he had Andre Koch Assis on recently, a scholar physicist from Brazil, who had found and I won't go into too much about this, but it's fascinating. Before Maxwell, there was a physicist named Wilhelm Weber. And Wilhelm Weber realized that particles that get closer than 10 to the minus 15 meters would attract in a big way, just derived from Newton's second equations. Now, this is important because no one has understood why ball lightning could hold together. And Assis explains that because of competition between Lord Kelvin and Gauss and Weber for patents on the telegraph, in the middle 1800s, there was competition between the continent and UK. They tried to erase Weber-Gauss from the history books to some degree, even though Weber and obviously Gauss had units named after them. But there was competition, so there's like this sociology going on here of why we don't know about Weber's force law. Anyway, I'm not going to get too technical, guys, but this is really interesting because it's showing us that 200 years ago, someone had theorized, before the discovery of any of the subatomic particles, the electron's not discovered, I think, 1880 or so, somewhere around there, 70, 80. Way before the discovery of the electron or the proton or any particle, someone theorized that particles, just using Newtonian laws, if not just Coulomb's law about repulsion, if they get really close together, like you would in a cold fusion experiment, linear cavitation, and other ways of creating condensed matter, beyond a certain point, they fuse. The particles adopt a wave-like motion. He was just projecting this, and what it suggests is that's why you get ball lightning doing what ball lightning does, and Zverbelis says it holds together for 2 days, and other researchers have said, no, 2 months, 4 months. Ken Shoulders, by the way, and then we'll get to Bigfoot, said that these EVOs, these charge clusters, whatever you want to call them, if you want to think about it simply, static electricity, but just kind of persistent static electricity, he said they can bury themselves into metals, and live indefinitely. Little phantom EVOs. They have an invisible mode. You do see them when you see those little shocks on your finger, or you pull up the covers on the bed at night and you get those little things. That's very short-lived EVOs. They don't last very long, they disperse, but they can turn into a long-lived form, and this is what a cold fusion LENR experiment is. Matsumoto, Takeaki Matsumoto, with his idea that ball lightning and cold fusion are the same thing, which is why you get this nucleosynthesis, this alchemy. Anyway, I know I'm talking a lot, guys, but it's really all coming together in an interesting way, and obviously I think that applies. Yeah, the charge clusters are Joule's charge clusters. So many names for them. Exotic vacuum objects, ectons. Shakparanov called them Kozyrev, Dirac, monopoles, magnetic monopoles, the holy grail of some aspects of physics. Magnetic monopoles that just have magnetic charge with no north or south, which Dirac proposed. And Matsumoto called them itonic clusters, not fusion of neutrons, not the way cold fusion thought about it. Even Matsumoto admitted he was wrong. It's a cluster of all sorts of different particles, including neutrinos, guys, antineutrinos, and relic neutrinos, because of their bosonic effect, have an effect on those itonic clusters, we believe, according to Alexander Parkhomov. So it's very interesting that we can find these consistencies here. So the real question is, guys, hey, Rob, how are you doing? Yeah, Matsumoto, this guy, if you get this book, I mean, Martin Fleisch Memorial Project, put it up on Amazon for $10. You will understand so much if you read these collected papers. It's so well done. And I wrote a review of it on Amazon, but there's tons of great pictures. I mean, there's these pictures of these things that are the same thing that all other cold fusion LENR researchers found, Ken Shoulders and Hutchinson and everyone, these little traces and what micro explosions. And, Matsumoto goes so far to say that what we're dealing with here are micro black holes and wormholes within an atomic structure. In other words, what we see at the large scale in the universe is repeated in these experiments. And he has all this stuff, and he shows you these little areas, which he says are like micro black holes. It's really cool. So I really recommend, for $10, you could spend it a lot worse way. It's a lot of fun, this book, and it'll totally explain to you what cold fusion is. Matsumoto just passed away earlier this year, and luckily, exactly, Bob, it's this kind of coherency, and this is what you get when you get these particles. They lose their individual nature. It's like if we were all at a dance together, and the room got smaller and smaller, and pretty soon there wasn't a way for us to dance individually, and we kind of formed that human wave. That's what we're talking about here. It's simply that Bose-Einstein condensate, but at room temperatures, which was discovered just down the road here at CU at absolute zero. But this is the point. Matsumoto and others have shown us you get this at room temperatures, and it's really important. It's big news. Matsumoto really explains it, that what we see at the largest scales of the universe, neutron stars, highly dense condensed matter, coherent matter, black holes, you find at the subatomic level, and you find these persistent microball lightnings, which he says it's the same thing that you find in these cold fusion experiments. And in A Flash of Beauty, which is why I ended up at all these conferences recently, came out a couple weeks ago on Vimeo. They had issues with their distributor, and Amazon and Apple got temporarily canceled. I'm told it will be available by the end of the year on all the major platforms. So this is the second Flash of Beauty. The first one was called Bigfoot Revealed. And in this movie, they actually, Brett, Jill, and Mike did such a good job. They actually got this material from Matsumoto. Bob Greenyer went to Japan in February and got the materials from Takeaki Matsumoto, who said he was about to throw it all away because he thought no one was interested. We're interested. He didn't know this. He's on his own, and Bob Greenyer got these videos, and some of it ended up in A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, of this microball lightnings in Matsumoto's underwater spark discharge experiments. So this is all just freaking fascinating. And then Matsumoto passes away a couple of weeks later. Bless his soul. It's like he had fulfilled his mission. Bob Greenyer went over there and got the materials from him, the photos, high-resolution photos, the videos. They had to find a video player in Japan because Japan is so modern. They keep moving on to the latest technology. Remember when the big thing was mini disc? When I went over to teach in Japan, they had mini disc players. That was a thing you could get in the late 80s, 90s in the US. Eventually they showed up here, but they were everywhere in Japan, mini disc players and all this stuff. They always had the latest. So Bob Greenyer had trouble finding a video VHS, which I'm sure you probably have one of those around somewhere, so they could look at Matsumoto's he was an experimentalist, but he realized from all this research that he was dealing with this micro ball lightning. By the way, for which he got banned from Fusion Technology magazine because they said you can't use the word ball lightning in our magazine. Guys, can you believe the obstacles we're up against? You come to a reasonable conclusion and the magazine says you're censored. You can't talk about ball lightning. Why not? All these professions set up these artificial barriers. We've heard about special access programs. I'm sure Rob could tell us more about those. But it's not just special access programs that are stovepiped and overly cut off from each other. It's these organizations that form these very narrow mindsets. You and I have all been exposed to this, right? And then they don't want alternative explanations. And so they say to Matsumoto, nope, you're banned from publishing in our magazine. I think Matsumoto should have won a Nobel Prize for his cold fusion experiments. And he was flexible enough to realize we weren't dealing with neutrons fusing. By the way, we'll get to Bigfoot in a second, but the big obstacle to a lot of ordinary scientists is they couldn't believe there was enough energy to fuse neutrons at room temperature. And that's not what's happening. It's not the neutrons. It's neutrinos and these sort of itonic clusters and so forth. And even Matsumoto realized it wasn't neutrons and quad neutrons. It was sort of this kind of interesting kind of more like a collection of particles clustering together, not just neutrons. And it makes a lot more sense from that point of view. And that's where the relic neutrinos can come in eventually, because they have an interaction through reverse beta decay with neutrinos, antineutrinos, and so forth. Anyway, I want to get to one question from Jules, and then we're headed off. I'm going to give you a summary of these conferences, the 5 that I went to. Jules wanted to know, consistent language would be helpful. Yes, Jules, but we're dealing with researchers from all over the planet: Japan, Russia, India, China, US. And this segmentation I'm talking about has prevented them from talking to other researchers, of course, behind the Iron Curtain in Soviet Union. Here, what happened to Fleischmann and Pons just doing a cold fusion experiment, which they did not want to publicize, but the University of Utah wanted the patents on, so you had to have prior knowledge and do a press conference, which they didn't want to do. And they got hammered for doing this press conference because normally in academia you publish and do peer review. So everyone's been in their own operating area, plus the classification. So we have EVOs, we have itonic clusters, we have ectons, and Kozyrev Dirac monopoles, and you can just call it good old static electricity that is highly condensed. And condensed plasmoids is another name for this. Not just plasmoids, organized plasma, condensed. That's the secret here to all of this, is when you get that compaction, you get other quantum properties taking hold. And this is where we should be going with all of our technology. And again, okay, one more thing before Bigfoot, the Thunderstorm generator. This is such an interesting story. I did a video about it because Malcolm Bendall met Martin Fleischmann at the behest of the U.S. Navy, spent a week with him and learned about Martin's cold fusion experiments, the implications, and spent decades generating a plasma charge separation device to work with the exhaust of combustion engines to turn the exhaust into a plasma and then completely rid it of the carbon, transmute the carbon into other elements. And that's being tested right now by Bob Greenyer and the MFMP. Interesting little short videos Bob's making, showing it seems to show some of these same features you get from Lehner experiments, the crenulated iron spheres, and the elements seem to be in the direction you get from Lehner experiments. So this is very interesting ongoing development, but this could be the first sort of application of cold fusion. Lehner is in this sort of hybrid Thor Thunderstorm generator. So take a look at that. There's a lot of interest in it right now in Europe. They had a press conference about it. So anyway, this is why the language the language is different, because you had all of these scientists working in isolation from each other, kind of in a marginalized by the scientific discipline, so kind of doing it on their own dime. They're not talking to other scientists. And finally, they realized that, someone in another country's already done it. So each person invented their own language. I had someone write to me on the YouTube channel recently. They said I should look at their page, and they called it, I forgot what this guy called it. He had another name for it than ball lightning, but he had just rediscovered what other people had discovered. And I think this is the nature of this type of science, is so many people are working on it in parallel that they've come up with multiple names for the same condensed plasmoid cluster, charge cluster. Shoulders originally called it electron validium, strong electrons. And, again, it's a fascinating story. So, hello, Jason. Thank you. So, Jewel says, sweetened condensed static electricity. Face, blue, smiling. I think that's good, Jules. Why don't we just call it that? Sweetened condensed static electricity. I mean, I think, guys, we do this with music. Hello. This is why concerts, especially with a lot of acoustic instruments, I think there's a reason why they feel so interesting. I think you're getting a type of condensed matter there from the sound waves. If you look up ion acoustic waves, there is there's a continuity between electromagnetism and sound. Yeah, really. Ion acoustic waves. Look it up. So, anyways. Yes. Okay, so here, guys, let's get on to what I wanted to talk about. Cohesive plasma discharge. Yes. But it's really condensed. If you look at the videos with Assis and Unzicker, I'll post the link below. It's quite amazing that someone 200 years ago said that there would be this incredible attraction of particles. He didn't know about different particles, but just imaginary force, which would turn to attraction. The force, repulsion, would turn to attraction below 10 to the minus 15. Which produces what? Cooper pairs, superconductivity. And it seems to me these sort of charge clusters, itonic clusters that Matsumoto did so much research on. Once you do that, you lose the individuality. And this is what I talk about, by the way. If you haven't seen it, you will soon. Flash of Beauty. I mention this because this is sort of the thing I get into there. So, is that you don't just get this in laboratories at absolute zero. That's what we've been told. It works at room temperature. The proof, the Lockheed Martin patent in coherent wave matter, which Bob Grenier discovered, which talks, first page, they say you don't just need Bose-Einstein condensates. You can get this at room temperature. It's like flocks of birds, murmuration, swarms of fish. You kind of get the idea. You get this coherency of the particles, and they become like one big particle, and that's your ball of light. That's your orb. That's your ball of lightning. Something like that. It just requires some sort of process to really condense the particles, to push the particles together in the first place. Whether it's a palladium lattice or a cavitation experiment, there are different ways to do it. Anyway, guys, yes. Plasma is over 95% of the matter in the known universe. And here's, one more thing about plasmas before we go to Bigfoot. I think this relates. Flames can be plasmas too. Your ordinary candle. It's not always plasma, but some of it can be plasma. At high enough temperatures, flames turn to ionized gases. So it's not just carbon bonds separating, but they actually ionize gases, the electrons and so forth, at enough temperature. So flames can be, I didn't know this, flames can be both plasma and sort of a very hot gas. They're kind of a transition. Maybe that's why we're fascinated by them. But what we're talking about is the transition from plasma to condensed plasmoids, the fifth state of matter. And from this moment on, I call for us to declassify this subject so we can start having intelligent conversations, and it's not just remain the property of a few defense contractors. Hello. We need to talk about this because it has to do with the way the whole power grid could work. But it'll happen on its own if Thunderstorm generator pans out. That's the type of technology, sort of transition technology. So, Bigfoot. As you know, if you've looked at any of my books recently, you know that I think the orbs that people see around Bigfoot, which I've heard a lot about, and it's in A Flash of Beauty, A Paranormal Bigfoot, there are many good examples of people seeing this. One of which is absolutely credible, these two witnesses in Oregon. You have to rent or buy the movie just for that. It's all really good. But that case, I'm not supposed to give away the spoilers in here. It is just, it's that coherent matter with a life form. And this is what we're talking about. This is my idea, is what the reason that you have Bigfoot connected to orbs and balls of light. And, if you read Stan Gordon's latest book, Creepy Cryptids, this is a good one too, Silent Invasion. I mean, Stan's one of the best. I interviewed him about 10 days ago. You can see it on the YouTube channel. Stan is one of the best researchers. He realized that there is this continuity between weird phenomena, like it or not. It goes from UFOs to cryptids to other phenomena that are orb-like. You can't separate them. I think Lakatsky points this out in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And he had a lot of, if you look at the Dave Grush interview, and, I have to thank Rob for alerting me to David, well before he came on the scene, just saying that there was, I said, David who, He said, no, you're going to hear from him. David Grush talked about how Lakatsky and the crew wanted to use Skinwalker Ranch as a demonstration of what we could learn scientifically from paranormal phenomena, which makes a lot of sense because that's one of the areas where you get these overlapping phenomenology. I'm just using the language of ball lightning scientists. They admit you can't quite see where the ball lightning stops and the UFOs, UAP begin. There's a continuity there. But it ended up frightening the federal government so much, according to what that Joe Rogan interview with Grush, which you have to watch, that they didn't want to fund it anymore. Again, Jules, this is why you get different language. It just fades into the background. The people keep doing it on their own, come up with their own language. They're not sharing this at conferences the way it should be shared. And so, those guys realized it. But Gordon's been doing this since 1959. He told this to me in the interview just 10 days ago. As a phone call receptionist for that Westinghouse UFO group, which Stanton Friedman was a part of, right? And he was the volunteer, and he's been manning the phone lines ever since 1959, guys. It's like one of these movies where someone's been there like doing the same thing for decades, and they don't realize things have changed. And Stan's been answering the phone since before all of us were born, for the most part. At least me and Dominic. And he said the calls have never stopped since 1959, and it's starting in 65, 2 years before Patterson Gimlin. He started hearing about Bigfoot being seen around the UFO sightings in his area of Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. So this is how it's connected. And this is the theme, and I have to thank again Brett, Jill, and Mike for being so open-minded enough to put some of the science that we're talking about here into the film, because so many people, I don't know why, guys, they're afraid to cross the line into other subjects. I'm not sure what it is. I mean, no one said the universe is cut into these hermetically sealed subjects. It's just because when you're dealing with non-ordinary fractal electromagnetic fields, it follows that any phenomena that has something to do with that is going to be on a continuum of weirdness. And Stan is so good at doing this. So watch the interview if you haven't seen it. I mean, I really love the comment that someone put there. She said, I didn't want the interview to end. I totally understand what she was saying. Stan's stories were so good, one after the other. I mean, cryptids that we don't even have names for. People seeing them run in front of their car. Little triangular craft going around people's homes out in fields or in their front yards. 6 by 9 feet triangular craft. Orbs showing up in people's homes, and just really interesting I think James Shubsky, who I interviewed again at Vernal, which we'll talk about just in a second, it's coming up. He called them one-off cryptids. One-off cryptids. These are cryptids that people see that no one's quite seen before. And in my previous interview with him at his Margie's Outdoor Store in Benjamin, Washington, and that was coming back from Forks, he told me about a sighting where someone he knows very well saw something like a small insect-like humanoid on two legs in the road, just a couple feet high, standing up. He went by it with his car, and then the car had electrical issues as he drove by it, and then he felt nauseous and sick for a while afterwards, which is not a surprise. This is part and parcel of the types of X-ray radiation that can be emitted by coherent matter. You have to watch out for it. So Stan talks about these types of one-off cryptids. James called like the Klickitat ape cat in that area by Mount Adams. I heard about the Klickitat ape cat up in Bozeman at the Bozeman Hot Springs campground, just with these folks that were camping right next to me when I was going through there one time. And they were from the Mount Adams, that area, Cascades. And he said about the Klickitat ape cat. I said, what? Well, now I've heard about the Klickitat ape cat. Gordon writes about this. Now, in his most recent book, Creepy Cryptids, volume 4 of his case books, I was just reading this earlier today. He goes into this case where these folks are going out to look where Bigfoot has been seen, and all they see all night are different types of orbs that grow bigger, grow smaller. First, they think they're campfires. They're up too high. They're moving around the woods, disappear, show up again, different colors. So this is what I learned about Bigfoot at the Bailey Sasquatch Outpost a couple years ago, run by Jim Myers. And the first conferences I went to were there, and it was about Russian-American Bigfoot research. And there was Igor Bortsev talking about these orbs and balls of light. And then other people there had talked about it. And so, in my thinking, and you don't have to agree, I just think an orb is an orb. I think we're dealing with the same types of orbs, maybe different causation, but the same phenomena, whether it be UFOs, crop circles, or Bigfoot. I think, or cold fusion lab. I think it's roughly the same sort of thing. There are variations on it, but I think it's the same type of condensed matter. Let me just put it that way. But because it has a quantum type of organization, the particles just adopt a single wave function, wave-like nature. That would put it on the level of different frequency, perhaps, that interacts with our minds, with consciousness. And this is why people so much talk about these telepathic experiences around Sasquatch. I mean, if you read the accounts, whether it's from Rusty Wilson's books or other accounts, Sasquatch Chronicles or any other sources, people say they hear Bigfoot talking in their minds. They don't believe it at first. Even Les Stroud in his Survivor Bigfoot series, which he did when he went out to this area in Portland, he described the same phenomena. He wanted to visit a psychologist afterwards. He says this, he thought he was going crazy. Some people have described it as a computerized voice, but it's talking to you. And it's in A Flash of Beauty, by the way. There's some examples of this. I haven't experienced this, but it shows us that something's really different about it. So I'm just going to hold off on the comments. Yeah. Okay, so one last comment before we get on to these. I'm just going to summarize what the people I met. You're going to want to hear this. It's very interesting witnesses that tell us something about Sasquatch, and you haven't heard from these people. So Rob's talking about the one that Lakatsky talks about from the Bigelow project, where one came in, I think it's from the right side of the car, and the daughter was in the front seat, and it went through his body, through his arm, and came out the other side. And then he got some sort of health effects from this. So don't try this at home. These are usually, from my experience, not necessarily harmful. They can just be neutral. But because they're organized on a different set of principles than ordinary matter, they can really change frequencies very quickly, and they can create X-rays, they can create ultraviolet radiation, and they can cause effects on your blood cells, which can affect your white blood cells, your immune system. So this is why I think you need to watch out for them. People that do these cold fusion LENR experiments talk about putting shields up. People who haven't done this have gotten cancer from their LENR experiments, and some of them have passed away already, because you're generating excess amounts of radiation. So this is something we need to be careful of if this becomes a technology that we have in our homes. You need to watch out for it. And a lot of these researchers have said, some of them, that they're the way they deal with it is by going into another room when these experiments are on. So on to, and we'll have some questions at the end. So let me just quickly cover some of these conferences. So, so the first one that I attended was all the way over in Forks, Washington. Now, why did I start going to these this summer? They're very interesting, but these are far apart, long drives, sometimes a couple days to get there. The folks that were showing A Flash of Beauty, Resonance Productions, just wanted me to be there to answer questions, since I'm talking about what I'm talking about to you right now in the film. And so they said, can you come out to Forks? I think it was Toby Johnson who said this in passing to me. You should come out there, because this was May 26th through 28th, way out in Forks. Now let me bring up where Forks is. I think I can, let me try some of these fancy effects here. Hold on. Where did it go? I've got Apple Maps up here, and I want to show you, if I share the screen, where Forks, Washington is. Yes. Oh, here it is. Share screen. Yes. Do you see that there? Is it? How come I can't make it bigger? Okay, this is something here, right? You can kind of see this. There's Forks, way out there on the Olympic Peninsula. Those of you who know about this will know the area. It's pretty far away from everything, and that's where this first one was. Now, I want to point out something that's relevant here. You'll see that Forks, Washington is near the Quinault. This is going to come up in a second. The Quinault Indian Reservation, the Maka Indian Reservation at Cape Flattery, and some other tribes that were there. These tribes claimed that they used to trade with Sasquatch. And Dave Paulides has talked about this on his channel, which is that it's in his Bigfoot series of classes that he had on his website, and his book about wild men, mountain devils, and monsters, I think, for his historical account of Sasquatch. Now, this is what's really interesting about it. There was an encounter with some Sasquatch in the Northwest, I think it was Oregon, in the 20s, and the sheriff said, let's go get him. And the tribes had a press conference. The Lumi, Clallam, and Quinault tribes, according to David, had a press conference, and they said, we trade with Bigfoot. We don't want you to harm them. They're another tribe. Okay, so right away, we have some evidence that they're not just a big ape, okay? Because people traded with them. Well, the reason this is so interesting to me right now is there was at the Forks conference, there was someone there, Neil, from the Spokane tribe, and he raised his hand and said his grandfather used to trade with Sasquatch. And the Spokane, Spokane, city is named after the Spokane tribe. So I went up to Neil and I talked to him and I asked him, what did they trade and when? And he said it was as recent as 1913. As recently as 1913, about 110 years ago, Native Americans were still trading. Some tribes were still trading with some Sasquatch. And I asked Neil, what did they trade? And he said they were trading. His grandfather was a salmon fisherman. And the Bigfoot would bring medicinal herbs, and they would trade salmon for medicinal herbs. So, I mean, we've heard this from other tribes. Neil wasn't the only one to say this. Do you think you trade with animals? The last time I checked, animals don't have a sense of economy the way humans do, a sense of value in trading and all that. So this is a lot of evidence that we're just not dealing with another animal the way some Sasquatch researchers like to present it, like some Gigantopithecus or something, one of Grover Krantz's offhanded remarks. By the way, Grover Krantz was just above me at WSU when I went to grad school. I mean, anthropology was upstairs from us, though I don't remember talking to him. It was quite a while ago, but he would have been around. And he offhandedly one day said, it could be like Gigantopithecus blacki, which is, they've only found a jaw from in China, and they recreated that huge appearance of the Gigantopithecus. I think I have an illustration of it right here in one of these public domain illustrations of Gigantopithecus. It's in here towards the beginning. Anyway, it's huge, right? You can see, but they only found the jaw, folks. There's no evidence it was ever in North America. Ever crossed the Bering Straits. It's a long time ago, like 100,000 years ago. There's no evidence it was here. So there's no evidence that monkeys or apes were ever in North America. So anyway, trading with Sasquatch. And so that was fascinating to me at Forks. Now, some of the other lectures here that were interesting. It was great seeing the movie screened for the first time. We had a very good reaction. There was someone there, Marcel Moore, who, Mark Meisel, who went to this location of the Fred Beck Ape Canyon incident where these miners were attacked by Sasquatch back in the 1920s. And Fred Beck actually wrote this book about it. And, it's interesting. Even back then, Beck says there was some supernatural component to the Bigfoot. He talks about these other phenomena that were very strange when these creatures were around. They were throwing rocks and stuff at the miners' cabin, and they shot at them and tried to get them to go away, eventually fled. So Mark went up to this area where the Ape Canyon event was supposed to have happened in Washington. I believe it's by Mount St. Helens, if I'm not mistaken. And they found the remnants of the cabin, the shells, and all of the evidence that was consistent with Fred Beck's story, which just is interesting because when you hear that, the Ape Canyon incident, like if you were like me and you heard this a couple of years ago, you might have felt like, fuck, is this fiction or fact, so forth. Well, Mark did the research and went up there and found the cabin and found the shells and other evidence would have been from 100 years ago, 1924. So it really happened, as best as we can tell. And so anyway, the Forks was really a lot of fun. And who else was there? Cliff Barackman was there from the North American Sasquatch Museum in Boring, Oregon. And I actually ran into some people from Boring the other day in the airport, Boring, Oregon. And I was talking to them, and they said something really fun. They said something like, I said, have you been to the Sasquatch Museum in Boring, Oregon? Cliff gave us a very good presentation. He's more of the view that this is, the anthropological view. This is some sort of relic ape or something like this. And I said, have you been there? And he goes, he said something like, well, those people, boy, what they believe in that museum, that is quite a stretch, don't you think? And I said, yeah, it sure is. So, So even people like Cliff going to the kind of safer interpretation, like this is a rare ape, a rare wood ape or something like that. Even the public who sees this, who's not really even, doesn't even buy that. So that was interesting. Rick Germeau was there, who's in both Flash of Beauties, Bigfoot Revealed, and the Paranormal Bigfoot. That was a lot of fun. Hearing from Rick, former law enforcement officer, detective. Oh, Rob Alley was a lot of fun. Now, Rob, I got to talk to Rob, and he just an excellent researcher. He's written all these books, which I highly recommend. His collection of stories along the Canadian coast. I'm reading his latest one, Brushes with Bigfoot. Just fascinating cases. So this was a very interesting conference. Thomas Seawood, a Native American from Vancouver, who gives, if you want to go out there with him and learn how to survive out in with a minimal amount of creature comforts the way Bigfoot does, he will take you out there on his tours. And Mel Scahan, of course, from Yakima, who told about working in forestry. And Mel was at a number of these conferences. Mel was very interesting because Mel talked about working as a forestry worker in the Yakima Reservation. And this was just very interesting because he heard the howls, and then he said to his crew, "What do you think's going on out there?" You know, and they said, "Well, we're not going back. You have to go about yourself to find out." And he just had more and more contact. Mel is part of the Yakima tribe, so his stories were very interesting. Now, when I talked to Mel about this, and you know, how much can you say within the Yakima tribe and within their governmental organizations about Sasquatch? So this is what we're dealing with, folks, is the same thing that Fleischman and Pons dealt with cold fusion and any of these topics, UFOs, you name it, you know the deal here. Mel said that his forestry supervisor said that if Mel ever mentioned anything about Bigfoot, their office would be shut down by the federal government, and the federal government would create a new forestry department on their own. So this is sort of the pressure that forestry workers are under. And I've heard other cases like that. A case in Idaho where forestry workers were working for the National Forest Service one summer, encounter a Sasquatch. One guy gets his tent collapsed overnight while he's sleeping in it. The poles are all bent. The whole thing's ripped up. And they go back to Lewiston, Idaho, to the office, and the guy's joking around. "Oh, yeah, we had other forestry workers," and they feel better until he says, "If you guys ever breathe a word of this, you're fired within 24 hours. Just switched like Jekyll and Hyde. So this is the pressure that people working for the federal government are under, even affiliated with the federal government. This is a topic that if you mention it, you'll be fired. Pretty much. This is what I'm hearing. So if you're wondering why we don't hear more about this, just like the UFO topic, it's because people's jobs are on the line. I don't know why we're suppressing this. Maybe you do. But it's pretty serious because people are not talking about their encounters. So Forks was very interesting. And let's see, the next one that I went to was Medellin Falls. The Medellin Falls, and let me see if I can share the screen again. Share screen. Yes, Medellin Falls. I don't know how to move this. Let's see if I can move this out of the way. Whoa, whatever. Medellin Falls was interesting because there were just a lot of interesting presenters there. And this Terrence James was very interesting from Canada. He got to know Dr. John Bindernagel, one of the original researchers like Grover Krantz from WSU, academics who studied it. Again, all of those people of the Bindernagel, Krantz generation. There are a couple other researchers. They were all of the view, and you have to keep in mind this is when it's just first being talked about in academic organizations and so forth. They were all of the view that this was some sort of rare primate. Any other stories, even though we heard that Fred Beck mentioned it even back in 1924 about weird effects around the Sasquatch that he called supernatural, if I'm not mistaken. You didn't have these folks, Ben Nagel and people like that, talking about this. But again, it's a type of self-censorship. I'm sure it was happening. When I read Orchard's book, Bigfoot of the Blues, which is on the shelf there somewhere, Lance Orchard's book, he mentions just the folks that were investigating in the 80s, the Grover Krantzes, some strange occurrences out there, things showing up, that water towers strangely appearing and disappearing near campsites. You know, it doesn't sound like an ordinary water tower to me. The kids describing Bigfoot as floating over the ground, things like this. And so you sort of get this even in books that are not looking for those supernatural effects. The witnesses will talk about that sort of thing happening. So that's very interesting. Now, one of the researchers I found very interesting from this was Mr. Jesus Payan, who was Gonzo in that TV series Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which I only saw a few episodes of Breaking Bad, but I had friends who would always tell me to watch it, and Better Call Saul. And if you're familiar with Gonzo, he is a Bigfoot researcher when he's not acting, and he has a YouTube channel called Breaking Bigfoot, which if you search for it on YouTube, I looked for it a little while ago, it has a slightly different name now, but he studies Bigfoot in New Mexico. And, you know, throughout New Mexico, you get these Bigfoot sightings. In Farmington area, North Navajo Reservation, and I used to work on the Navajo Reservation during one summer in college. I worked on the southern part of Rama, a kind of separate reservation from the main reservation. But this is north of Gallup. He said they call them the Hairy Boys. Going back to Jules' question, why we have different names. There's hundreds of names for Sasquatch. And the Navajo, they're called them the Hairy Boys, and they're pests. They steal goats and chickens and fruit and things. So it was interesting showing us how he takes people out to different areas on the reservation. So it was a lot of fun being. Meddling Falls, by the way, is in the far northeast corner of Washington. Let me see if I can bring that up here. And yeah, okay, so it's the other side of Washington State, this side over here. Colville, yes, Meddling Falls, you see it over here? Way out in the corner, not far from another part of the state. So it was interesting, Meddling Falls. I'll be doing something with a Flash of Beauty up there again this April, if you want to see a screening up there. So the next conference after Meddling Falls, let me think. Yes, Phenomicon. How could we forget? The Phenomicon conference in Vernal, Utah, near the Skinwalker Ranch. Let me see if I can bring this up here. Here, Phenomicon. Yeah, so the Phenomicon was really a lot of fun. There was another screening of A Flash of Beauty, and a lot of folks were there. There was also a movie about Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona, and I'm also in that one from Alan Margula and Ron Meyer, who are from the Boulder area. They live in this area of Colorado, and they filmed me for that. Even though at the time I didn't know a heck of a lot about Bradshaw Ranch, but it's a very interesting movie. I thought in some ways they had some geologists talking about the chemistry there in geology that could create charge clusters and things like this. That's my interpretation of what he was saying. So this was interesting. We had Travis Taylor was there, and of course Travis Walton's always fun. I've heard Travis talk before. Fire in the Sky, Snowflake, Arizona. He's out there with the 6 loggers, and they see something farther away in the forests, and you know, Travis, they go drive by. Travis runs out. He said it was the stupidest thing he ever did. He gets zapped, and then he disappears, and the other 5 are accused of maybe, killing him or kidnapping him by the sheriff. They go undergo these lie detector tests. There was a bad movie made about it, Fire in the Sky, which Travis says is not accurate. The ETs were not hostile in any way, shape, or form. So this is what was interesting about hearing Travis talk about this time. And I've seen him before at the Open Minds UFO Congress outside of Scottsdale. When it was held outside of Scottsdale, now it's held in Phoenix. So this is what was interesting to me, going back to what we're talking about here. DJ, that's a good question. We will get to it in a moment. We will get to that. We'll cover that in a sec. So what I liked about Travis is, one, what was the thing that zapped out of the craft by the tree when he went out and ran out and said, I got to go see this thing, I mean, folks, if you anyone on this watching this right now, if you saw a disc hovering over the ground, you'd probably want to get out too, right? I mean, there's some dangers to being around these phenomena in terms of radiation and so forth. I mean, Hal Puthoff's talked about this. Gary Sterling, the Minot security missile guard that I've interviewed, and I'm going to feature him, by the way, in the new version of Black Swan Ghost that I'm working on, along with David Noble Whitecrow. A story from the Navy, from Operation Dominique, and that the engineer that I met at a conference who told me about seeing the crash materials. So you and I might go running out towards this, but Travis did it, and he said what he thinks happened now. Then think about this, and we're talking about the EVOs and all this, and static electricity. He thinks it was not a deliberate release of energy from the craft. They weren't trying to zap him. He feels that what happened is this object's going low over the trees and is building up static electricity, aka charge clusters, aka atonic clusters, EVOs, and ectons, and all this other names for this. Tesla called it radiant energy. So it's building up this radiant energy, this cold electricity. And he feels that it discharged into him because he got too close to it. It's kind of like if there was like a big Tesla generator, that big, we've seen those in those Tesla photos, that big steel dome, whatever it's made of, and it's zapping out electricity. He feels like kind of like that. He got too close to it and it discharged into him. It was not deliberate. And they took him into the craft to heal him because they felt that was his feeling. He spent a couple days with him, that they took him up into the ship to heal him because it was an accident. He feels it was an accident. I think that's very interesting for anyone who's using this as evidence that these ETs are hostile, right? And then the second point he made is, he talked about this blue glow beneath the craft. He said it actually wasn't blue. It wasn't like a blue light bulb. Let's put it this way. It was emitting blue light. It sounds an awful lot in the direction of plasmas to me, or condensed plasma. I mean, something that emits light, but it's not a bulb. It's just emitting this sort of dull blue glow. And it reminded me a lot of Peter Leather, the jockey that I talk about in Black Swan Ghosts, who is walking over the downs one night at 1 a.m. and they see this thing kind of coming across and flashing, and it lands. The friend panics, but Peter wants to go towards the craft, and the door opens. He said this tall 6-foot being got out of the craft in a tight suit. I never forgot this. He said it was carrying, and it's on the new cover of Black Swan Ghost, since we have redone the cover, thanks to Mark Tuckman, the same person that did the cover for Dark Matter Monsters. We have a new cover for Black Swan Ghost. And it's on the cover because Peter said he was holding an object that emitted light. It wasn't a flashlight. It emitted a red light. This is sort of what Walton said about the underside of this craft. It emitted a light. It's just an indication we're dealing with a type of technology with another form of matter, which is not like the light bulbs we're used to. And as Rob pointed out, plasmas are 95% of the universe. in the chat here. But it's something like that on that order. Be plasma, condensed, organized plasmoid, something like that. Coherent matter, which emits light. Let me just make an analogy here. Ball lightning emits light because it's ionizing the oxygen around it. But often ball lightning is cool to the touch. And just like when Bigfoot's around, ball lightning can cause the area to feel cold. Just like people say around UFOs, cryptids, and Bigfoot, it felt suddenly cold. They started shivering. It was summer. They had to put on a coat. That is a symptom of being around coherent matter, which can absorb heat. And ball lightning, even though it's glowing, is very often cool to the touch when people get in contact with it. Even though ball lightning can boil water, and it's in some of these books about ball lightning and these cases where it went into a bathtub and the water evaporated, but the ball lightning itself is not hot. It's releasing energy which the molecules of water or gases interpret as heat and creates heat effects. So that's very interesting. So another person here, Dr. Maria Meyer. This was part of the crew of this TV show Expedition Bigfoot. Ronnie LeBlanc was there, Russell Acord. I thought this was a very interesting bunch. I haven't seen the show Expedition Bigfoot. Sorry, you guys are watching the show. But Maria Meyer was very interesting because she got a PhD, I believe it was in animal physiology or something. And what I remember about her talk is when she went to what is the island off of the southeast part of Africa, just skipping my mind. What's the animated show about it? Where all the lemurs are. She got the president of that country, Madagascar. Thank you. Madagascar. She got them to create a national park for lemurs. They discovered a type of lemur out there that they didn't think existed, and she had a meeting with the president of the country and convinced them to create a national park for these lemurs. So it's just great work. And it was very interesting listening to her, about someone who's a mother of like 4 kids, and she still has time to do the TV show. And, these guys go all over to do this show. I think when they talked to us here, they were filming in Alaska. I enjoyed talking to Ronnie, and he has this book called Monsterland, which this was interesting. Leominster, Massachusetts is a paranormal hotspot. Go figure. I just started reading it, and it is just interesting. Monsterland, encounters with UFOs, Bigfoot, and orange orbs. Just going back to your question, DJ, a few minutes ago, which we will get to. They go together, folks. UFOs, Bigfoot, and orbs. Like it or not. I was even one that when I was at UFO conferences, I would wonder why there was a Bigfoot speaker there. At my UFO conference, what would advanced space aliens have anything to do with big hairy apes? Because they're not big hairy apes, and we're dealing with similar states of matter and frequencies, parallel realities. Pick the one you want. But this whole book, Monsterland, from Ronnie LeBlanc, is very interesting about who would have known an area in Massachusetts had the same features as Skinwalker Ranch. Okay, similar. Marley Woods, or Elbert County, the ranch down there in Colorado. Russell Acord also from Expedition Book also had some interesting books which I've read, but I purchased and have not read yet. So we also had the Skinwalker group there. We had Thomas Winterton, Eric Bard was there, Caleb, and Arnold, Bryant Dragon Arnold was there. That was interesting to hear from them. Vernal is not very far from Skinwalker Ranch. So this conference was a very interesting conference, and William Henry was there talking about ancient technology, which was a lot, plasma technology, which goes into Randall Carson, you've seen on YouTube, talking about what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, Thunderstorm generator. So it was interesting to see this come around full circle before the Thunderstorm generator was even really well known before a few weeks ago. So this was the Vernal Conference. I also enjoyed, now let me tell you one more presentation, which I found interesting just listening to, the Blind Frog Ranch folks, people were there, Dwayne Ollinger and that group. That's like a YouTube show. I'm not that familiar with it, but they get similar things to Skinwalker Ranch. I believe it's 30 miles north of Skinwalker Ranch. So they had a witness. Now, this is really interesting. They had a witness at the beginning of the Blind Frog Ranch presentation of some woman going out there to see orbs like you or I might do, right? I mean, you got a Friday night or something. Let's go out and look at orbs at the Blind Frog Ranch or just at the edge of it, right? On public property or something. She saw an orb. She went out, filmed it. We saw some of the video of it. She immediately feels really sick, gets nauseous. She can't sleep. And then at 6 a.m., she's exhausted, goes to sleep at 6 a.m., sleeps till 10 after seeing this orb. And people put a note on her car because they don't know where she is. And she's sleeping in the driver's seat. And they don't even see her through the window. And she said she isn't the type of person to sleep late. So this is what, if you listen to my interview with Stan Gordon from a couple days ago, he mentions two witnesses where they also went to sleep and felt drowsy after seeing orbs in their homes or outside by the mailbox or something. So there's something about some of these orbs, and Rob mentioned it before, the Lakatsky case where, some comes across a field. You have to be careful. I mean, I did get invited to go out to the edge of Skinwalker Ranch, and I didn't go. There was other things going on that night at Dinosaur National Monument, like a dark sky watch and so forth, and I went to that. But, I mean, the Skinwalker crew is very adamant that people don't come onto the ranch. And, I mean, there are some reasons for this. We don't know exactly what this energy is. I think it could have something to do with the gilsonite out there. And there were people selling gilsonite there at Vernal, the conference. People who mined it. It's a very carbon-rich material that's used in making asphalt. It's a good insulator, but it's carbon-rich, has plenty of electrons in this. I mean, would help with creating other states of matter. It's just an idea I have about it. So the gilsonite could have something to do with it. But anyway, we don't totally know what we're dealing with. So moving on, Vernal was a lot of fun. The next conference for me after Vernal was the Kalispell conference, the Montana Mystery Conference. Now, this was up in Kalispell, and it was a really interesting bunch of speakers here. And this was created by Dave Pilates and Joe Hauser of the Montana Vortex. There's like an area, I haven't been to it, there's an area up there east of Kalispell, the Vortex area, where there's weird magnetic effects. And if you stand there, your height will be different. The light seems a little bent or something. Maybe even a little blurry. And so this was a fun conference. I enjoyed finally meeting Ron Moorhead, who, we interviewed him about a year ago on the show here. He's a big part of Dark Matter Monsters. Because Ron's one of the original witnesses to Sierra Sounds. He recorded the Sierra Sounds. And again, just like Vernal, this is not a totally Bigfoot conference, but it was a lot, mostly Bigfoot. It was interesting to talk to Ron. And he's the one that had all these phenomena around. Going back to DJ's question a few moments ago in chat. He's the one who said you could not see them. They were invisible. They were on the other side of the wall of that hunting structure that they assembled in the Sierra Nevadas on National Forest property, which I'm told from people that work in historical preservation should have been made into a historical site rather than dismantled by the National Forest Service. You could have made a claim that this was a historically important spot. Because Ron brought up skeptics and all sorts of people, and everyone heard the Bigfoot talking. And they would put mics. If you've listened to my interview with Ron, they put mics into the wall. You can hear the conversations between the Sasquatch. Sometimes they're right on the other side of the wall. Ron said they did not cast shadows. They would sneak outside. You did not see them. he even reminded us again, there was one area where they heard the talking and the chatter, the samurai chatter, reverse samurai chatter, as people call it, coming from this tree. And he and another guy tried to get there, and like 15 feet from the tree, they couldn't walk any closer to it. It was like coming from the tree, the Sasquatch chatter. And he's the one who talked about seeing this Star Wars lightsaber going through the forest on another. He went up there 9 times. Another time, hearing something like a gong above the hunting structure. Even inside the structure, they heard something come in, but they could never see what it was that would make clicking sounds between their sleeping bags. And the famous case where they heard all this metal crashing in the middle of the night, like their kitchen was being thrown apart, just horrendous sounds. But in the morning, nothing had been disturbed. It's like, I forgot who said it here. I think it might have been Tom Powell, who you can see there. Tom said, it's like they have a hard drive in their chest and they've recorded every sound they ever heard and they can recreate it. Sasquatch can recreate the sounds of car door slamming. You name it. They can sound like you calling for your dog. You read these Rusty Wilson books, and I've corresponded with Rusty and his audio, the guy that did the audio books, or Richard Hensel, for Rusty Wilson's. The books are Bigfoot, Campfire Stories, and so there are about 24 of them. And you hear people saying that, the mimicry that Sasquatch is capable of. I heard examples of this in Vernal. There was someone there who said that he was out in the Blue Mountains and they heard a crow imitate one of their words that they said, "What?" And then they heard a huge human-like voice a little farther away saying, "What?" Deep and big. This is Sasquatch can do this. And they both hightailed it out of there before even talking to each other. They were so frightened by the sound. So the Sasquatch are known to create this mimicry, and they can lure you deeper into the forest sometimes. I came across a story recently where they made the sound of a cow in distress and got this guy lost in the woods up in part of Colorado, south of here. So they're really good at this mimicry. Now, Scott Nelson, who you can see there, is a former Navy linguist, and he talked about, and by the way, David posted these on his Can-Am Missing channel, which is really good of David to do because, this costs money to go to the conference. You got to drive there, lodging, and you can watch this for free on his YouTube channel. He put up Jonathan Dover, the Navajo Ranger, and he's put up Scott Nelson and Ron Moorhead so far. And it just was really interesting to hear from Scott because he said that Sasquatch can talk while they're inhaling. This is why they can talk so quickly. And he slowed down their speech for us and showed us how you can hear syllables in their speech, what they call in linguistics phonemes. And so, again, it's just more evidence that, animals don't have articulated speech. They have a type of speech, your dog can communicate with you. I've heard crows, in trees kind of seemingly having a conversation in a crow language, but they don't have this articulated speech like we do. And Sasquatch does. Again, evidence that it's a distant human. By the way, when I asked Neil in Forks from the Spokane tribe, what did he believe they were? What did his grandfather say they were? They were another distant tribe, just like some of the other tribes have said. Another Indian tribe, but distant, far distant. So they're related to us in some way. I don't know the total story here. None of us do about how we're related. But one distinct possibility is that we're hybridized by ETs from whatever the hominid line was, and the Sasquatch kept evolving, or whatever the hominid was back then evolved into Sasquatch, and we got hybridized. Okay, that's just one theory. I'm just throwing it out there. Don't flip out over it. So, so Scott's presentation was fascinating. Jonathan Dover, of course, he has, this is someone who has 4,000 hours of law enforcement training, hired by the Navajo tribe to investigate paranormal phenomena. And, he's told, you've heard him on some of these podcasts, the UFO podcast by, his name is skipping me at the moment, not that UFO podcast, the Martin something's podcast. Martin, anyway, he was on there recently, the UFO podcast, and he had these fascinating stories from the reservation. Some of it had to do with skinwalkers. He's dealt with that quite. He even, a lot. He even said they encountered some with one of the film crews, and they refused to go any farther. They had told the film crew ahead of time, if we encounter skinwalkers, we will not go any farther, and they left the film site. But he told us a lot of interesting stories, including one of these cryptids. I mean, he's talked to this story. He didn't mention it for lack of time during his presentation, but I asked him about it later with Jim Myers, and he mentioned something chasing his partner Stan on the highway when this guy was just going to see a driving movie. I mean, could run at highway speeds at 60 miles an hour. It looked wolf-like. It was so tall it went up into the window of the car, and the guy was like trying to get back in the seat to get away from it, and it had glowing eyes and so forth, and was running at 60 miles an hour on the highway, following his car. He had to go to 80 to get away from it. And you hear about stories like this, and I just want to put it out there that, the people that didn't get away from these things, we don't hear from them again. We don't hear their stories. This is why we don't know enough about this whole subject. We can read Rusty Wilson's books and hear about these Bigfoot encounters where the people get away, where the car is chased, where the car is damaged. I mean, you heard from Gary Anderson, right? When we did the interview with Gary Anderson of the radio talk show host, and he came on the show after I was on his show. You heard about his account up in BC. He was running from this huge caveman-like creature with his friend, the doctor, who refused to ever talk about it again. And it damaged his car. It did $4,000 or $5,000 worth of damage, throwing a log or something at it as they were getting away. And, Gary was convinced if they hadn't gotten out of there, you wouldn't be hearing from them again. And you read stories like this. So I'm always just wondering what happens to the people that didn't get away. And I just don't have enough evidence to know about that to really talk about it intelligently. But it's part of this whole story. And again, I think it's something we should understand. These encounters are so varied. It's just like encountering humans on Earth. I mean, there's so much variation in your encounter. It could be hospitable, or it could be really hostile or lethal. So it's just something to take into account. So Jonathan Dover's presentation was fascinating. You can listen to it on YouTube. Martin Willis. Thanks, Julie. It was Martin Willis. Jonathan Dover is on there, but you can hear him again just on Dave's channel. It's a great presentation. I mean, because I worked with the Navajo for a couple of months, and I never heard about any of this, but they have a lot of paranormal activity out there. I loved what Jonathan talked about in terms of the footprints disappearing in trackable ground. I mean, he's a trained tracker. He told us he tracked archaeological thieves out on the reservation who steal Navajo pottery and artifacts from the ground, excavate things, right? And he's trained with his police force out there, tribal police, to track these people and find them, which he told us many examples where they did. And he said the Sasquatch prints would just end in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the prints would just stop in the mud. They should not, like somebody picked them up. And when you went back to where the Sasquatch tracks started, they started in the middle of nowhere. And that's why you get the books When the Footprints in Kutkin and Renner, where the footprints end, volumes 1 or 2, which we know is a big inspiration for dark matter monsters when you hear about all this. We'll summarize that in a second. So one more person I met out in Vernal was a person who told me that they in an area of Utah, in the Salt Lake area, there was a canyon they used to go as a kid and bike ride into. And this person said that he used to meet the Sasquatch. They would teach him things, they could speak a passable English and how to throw rocks and build tree structures. It's real interesting. So I encourage this person to write a book about it. But this is the thing I learned, and I'll just summarize this before I get to the final conference, Yakima, and then we'll wrap it up soon. People don't share these stories beyond these conferences. The reason you go to these conferences is you meet witnesses who have never really talked about it. They don't know how to talk about it to the rest of society, like the guy that used to see them as a kid. And he said he would sit in their lap. It's like it's so far out of the bounds of what we've been taught is real that it gets censored. And so you go to these conferences, it's like Fractal research. You're getting the real local history from these areas. I heard a lot of other stories from the Vernal area of people, from a guy named JJ, an artist there who was selling his prints. Really interesting stuff. And we stayed in touch, and I heard stories about he's talked to people in the area, what he's seen. Daryl from the first Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, was also there. He's the last person in the first Flash of Beauty film, the guy up in Alaska that saw one and saw it walk away. And he told me a lot of stories from the Vernal area because he's open about it. And he asked people if they've had contact with Bigfoot. And there were interesting stories from truck drivers and people who've quit working out in the oil fields who've had them come right up to the trucks and things. They're so tall they're looking down into the window. And this is the type of history we're not hearing about because it's so local and it just doesn't quite make it into, professionals are scared of this reputation trap, which you're all familiar with, right? The reputation trap is if you talk about these topics that could soil your reputation, you won't get tenure or whatever, you won't get promoted. And professionals are all frightened of this because they all have bills to pay and nobody wants to have their job prospects cut short by talking about this. I mean, Lakatsky mentions it at Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. He said they went to DHS and they said, hey, we've got this stuff going on. Would you like to be involved? And what did they say? What does Lakatsky say in the book? This bureaucrat from DHS says, we're a new organization on the block. This is shortly after 9/11. We don't want our reputations ruined by being associated with your Skinwalker Ranch. We will not be involved. So this is why you don't get the information. So my view is that, let me take this off the screen. I'll take it off a sec. What's going on here. People are afraid to investigate this, and the witnesses are afraid of the ridicule and the ostracism. I think it's the same thing going on with the UFO disclosure, the congressional hearings, and so forth. Is the witnesses are afraid to come forward because of the ridicule they get from their neighbors, friends, and other ones. I mean, people told me their friends laughed at them when they shared stories like this, even their friends. And nobody likes that feeling. So they don't share it. And then professionals, except for a few in the UFO field, they're hesitant to come into this area because they feel it would make, not be good for their career prospects in academia. And so you got like this double repulsion effect. But when you go to these conferences and you talk to people, you hear these stories. Now, I will give you one perfect example. I ran into a woman from Missoula in the hotel, and I was with Astro, who's sleeping here on the couch. My rescue dog from New Mexico is just about a year old. He had his first Thanksgiving with people yesterday, which is a lot of fun, because a year ago he was just on his own somewhere on the reservation, actually not far from Ramo. I found out from his papers where I used to work. And I said, well, what got you to come to a conference like this? She said it was her first conference she's ever been to in her life. And she was like in her 30s or something, 30s, 40s. So I said, well, why did you want to come to a Bigfoot conference? She said, when I was a teenager on my grandparents' property north of Missoula, one of the counties north of Missoula, I was walking out there, and it was a big property, and my dog immediately went down and was staring at something. I looked, and we saw a juvenile Bigfoot with jet black hair, and in front of our eyes, it went invisible. She said it digitized. That was her words, and went invisible. I said, what do you mean, like pixelated? Like kind of, like grainy pixelation? She said, exactly. So, yeah, it's what Rob's saying here. They kind of phase out. And here's a witness. She had never been to a conference before. She's never probably talked to very many people about it before. It's just incredible to meet someone that's seen Bigfoot gone invisible, which you'll see some examples of in the new Flash of Beauty film. And, here, they're telling it to you. They've never told anyone really before. They're not profiting from it in any way. And these are the hidden events that we need to investigate. So, that's why you go to these conferences, just meeting people like this who they come to these conferences. Like I started going to UFO conferences after remote viewing just to learn more. And you got other people going to these UFO conferences, people that worked in the government, NASA, who want to know more about what they saw or learned. Maybe we can put the puzzle pieces together. So this happens at these Bigfoot conferences too. And, they're very local, these conferences, a lot of local people there. And they all have a lot of interesting stories. So Jim Myers was there. Now, he's actually from the Bailey and Sasquatch Outpost. And I had been on Jim's Bigfoot Adventure Weekend the previous summer, a year and a couple months ago, a year and a half ago, out at Bailey. Our group that night did not see anything, but the group a couple miles away did through their thermal scope and took us back there the next day where they had seen what they thought was an adult and a juvenile. And so Jim gives these, you can look at the Sasquatch Outpost. He gives these weekend ventures to go out to Bigfoot country. And Jim has said they haven't had any negative experiences ever in that neck of the woods with Sasquatch, though, you can hear other encounters of this, like this. And Joe talked about the vortex, and Dave talked about missing people in Glacier. And before that, all the evidence that Sasquatch is not just a relic primate. And he went, there's a lot of interesting evidence that he's presented there. I think very convincing that we're not dealing with a primate. I mean, you got this argument from the folks like Jeff Meldrum at Idaho State University, which I almost ended up working in Pocatello in the social department. But to me, I don't know, you can believe what you want based on the evidence, but clearly to me, it's what like Igor Bortsev told us in Bailey. It's like a paranormal human. That's the closest description you can have of it. So just finally, before we answer some questions and wrap it up, guys, it's been a good long hour and 45 minutes. Thanks. The final conference I went to, which they don't have up anymore, as you can see on their site, is the Yakima Valley Conference in Yakima, Washington. That was just a couple weeks ago. And again, there was a screening of A Flash of Beauty there. Again, a lot of local people, very interesting to talk to. The website, they are not, they took the information about it down, but let's see, Yakima is, let me see if I can show this to you. Yeah, so Yakima would be more towards the center of Washington State, out in this direction. Up here towards the Cascade Mountains. And wait a minute, we're too high. Yes, over here, we're getting there. Yes, right down from Wenatchee. There we are. Good old Yakima, yes. So that was a lot of fun being out there. And it was one of the presentations. Mel Scahan was there again. And from the Yakima tribe. And there was, so here's one really interesting story that I'll leave you with before we just answer a couple questions and break for the night. And get to some comments and wrap it up. Is there was a woman there that worked, I think, in the fire department or something like this. And she told us this story, which is just so, it's just so freaking fascinating. She told this story that, let's see, that she, the story was she was riding a horse, and as a kid, and they went, the horse kicked a log with hornets in it. The hornet stung the horse. It ran off. They kept stinging her. She went unconscious, and then she woke up, something big and hairy is carrying her. It carried her back to her grandfather's house and then honked the horn of the truck. And they found her out there. And they said, "How did you honk the horn? You're just a little kid, and you're half unconscious with hornets bite." She said, "No, it wasn't me. It was the creature." So that is what's very interesting about this, is that these Sasquatch sometimes rescue people. And, they rescue people. And this was one of those rescue stories. Now, in Rusty Wilson's book about Glacier, Montana, Glacier National Park stories. He has some traditional national parks. Rusty being a fly fisherman in this state near Steamboat, who's collected stories from his fly fishing guests and other people he meets while he's engaged in fishing. You know, you hear these stories of people breaking both arms or something, running, falling, wrists, hard to get up if your both wrists are broken and you're on the heavier side, and being carried down to safety in the parking lot. And one of the first stories I ever heard about this was from someone from Chico at one of the International UFO Congress meetings who came up to me. You know, and I wasn't quite ready for the topic at the time. And he told me that this happened to his aunt. She fell off a horse. It's like this woman from Yakima, who the story I shared, she, you know, around a bend, she's unconscious on the ground, feels something big and hairy, pick her up and bring her off the path to safety. So there's lots of cases like that. And I've heard this now from different people. He often also told me about this fellow from Chico, also another case of a guy like stumbling over a cliff, getting too close and hanging on to a root or something, and a big hairy hand reached over and pulled him up. When I first heard these stories, folks, I thought this is, it seems hard to believe, right? If you're not ready for it, but this is the types of stories I've read and heard about now over and over again. And the other type, the Gary Anderson type, where Gary says, I can't believe people go out looking for the Sasquatch. You know, I don't even want to go hiking anymore. You read this and hear about this so many times. I don't want to camp anymore. We sold our camper. I don't hike anymore. I was raised to hike. I mean, so there's a whole range of encounters here. Pretty serious stuff. People get rescued. It depends what mood these Bigfoot are in, it seems to be, when you meet them. They could really be save your life in some cases. People report being fed by them, berries and things, for a couple days till they were better. And other people report, you know, having their cars smashed up and just feeling like they were, you know, their life was about to end right there. That feeling of terror, they said, it's just beyond anything. And you hear this over and over again, beyond anything they ever even felt. It was just beyond anything. So in any case, so the Yakima conference was also really interesting. We've had very good receptions to the movie. And so what I've learned from all this is there's a lot of witnesses out there. I would imagine this applies to the UFO field too, but there are a lot of Bigfoot witnesses. I mean, Jules, she's shared her story with us before. She's a witness when she was a kid in Indiana, seeing that Sasquatch picking berries at the end of the street, which her parents said that was Mr. So-and-so, a neighbor in a fur coat. It's so funny that Jules said that, because in these descriptions, people always say, it looked like a linebacker in a fur coat, you know, or they first thought it was just a really big guy in a fur coat. So your mind has these intellectual alibis for creating interpretations that fit with, you know, your reality. And when you see a Sasquatch for the first time, or a cryptid, or a dogman, or a thunderbird, or something like this, you know, I was talking to someone, I can't remember this off the top of my head, someone who had talked to a couple geologists who had seen thunderbirds. These are huge pterodactyl, like, there's a couple types, but one's a pterodactyl type and one's just like a super huge owl or something, what I mean, with a 20-foot wingspan. And I remember this person telling me that this geologist thought they were looking at a Piper Cub airplane when it came towards them, something like that. They just thought it had to be a small plane. It was that big until it started flapping its wings. Your mind has a way of, and they go into this in The Flash of Beauty in the beginning. Just like indigenous peoples couldn't see the ships of the European explorers, they thought they were seeing a mountain out on the water. You know, when you see something like this, and they go into this in The Flash of Beauty towards the end with hypnotists and so forth, your mind has a way of deleting these events. It's so far beyond what you are expecting to see that you might have had contact and forgotten about it, because your brain has a lot of defense mechanisms. I don't remember having a single Sasquatch encounter ever, but as we've learned from the first Flash of Beauty, you could have had this and you would only remember it under hypnosis. I mean, because it just doesn't fit. I mean, we've had, I mentioned Lauren in this book, a neighbor, someone I know from the Boulder area. And she has a couple cases of one hiking up there in the Rocky Mountains with a friend and then just finding themselves back in the parking lot without remembering how they got from way into the trail back to the parking lot. A couple hours have gone by. It's very hard to explain. And that's an area where people have seen Bigfoot a lot. Other people report around Bigfoot that, they were like about to take a picture. Kenny, the Bigfoot guy from Estes Park, that's what it says on his car, the Bigfoot guy. He says he was raising a camera up. He had it on a deliberately short string, so it didn't take long to get the camera, good old-fashioned camera, to take a picture of a Sasquatch, a juvenile, in the distance up in the Estes Park area. The next thing he knows, he's back in the truck and the engine's running. And there's no picture. And he said it would have been a 10-minute walk. So going back to DJ's question, thank you, DJ, from a few minutes ago. I haven't forgotten. Yeah, this is what is weird about it. And I noticed this with the first witnesses I ever talked to at Bailey, at the conference there, the one-day conference, the Russia-America conference. And they held some other events later. And I talked to these people, and it's like, you can be disoriented by Sasquatch. Now, some people think it's due to infrasound, the type of sound that elephants and whales make, a very low rumbling sound that they use to communicate. And perhaps, I don't know, there's a theory that Bigfoot uses this to paralyze prey or something. But that's a possibility, but nobody knows a lot about infrasound. I'm told there's no real infrasound experts in the U.S. and about animals who do this. And, the other possibility to me is these non-ordinary electromagnetic fields, which would warp space-time. I mean, let's use our imaginations here. If you have condensed matter, coherent matter, these orbs that people often see in and around Sasquatch areas, you read Ken Shoulders, and he says it lowers the permittivity of space around us. And the lower permittivity you go, the faster the speed of light is, which would change the permittivity and permeability, or would cause the electromagnetic constants, which electromagnetic phenomena, light being one of them, to change its speed, variable speed of light, something that Einstein talked about in 1907 and 1911. If you watch the Alexander Unsicker channel, it talks about the variable speed of light idea. That would just have all sorts of changes in how we perceive space-time. And that's my guess as what's going on. Maybe infrasound has something to do with it, but I think it's a distortion of space-time that Bigfoot is capable of manifesting through. It could be the way they create sound. It could be the hair that they have could create static charges. And all you need is some charge separation to generate these exotic vacuum objects and create orbs and microball lightning and so forth. So this is my interpretation of it, folks, that we're getting a change in the structure of space-time due to a variable speed of light, which is exactly what Hal Puthoff told us in 2018 at the SSC IRVA conference in Vegas, is that this is what the technology of some UFOs is, that they're changing the structure of space-time, which is why they're shifted to blue, because there's a variable speed of light. Hal Puthoff being one of the people that talk about the variable speed of light. Now, physicists don't talk about variable speed of light almost ever. Einstein was afraid to talk about it because he was already on the path to a Nobel Prize with his photoelectric effect and general theory of relativity. I think he has Nobel Prizes for photoelectric effect, but his theories of relativity are based on a constant speed of light. So he didn't really want to go off in the direction of the variable speed of light. But if you're looking at condensed plasmoids, orbs, ball lightning, you're dealing with permittivity changes. And Jules and I often joke about this because she's always poking me with this, the blurriness. I mean, the Leonard cold fusion researchers from Russia have talked, Shak Paranov, just to give one example, have talked about they could never take non-blurry photos of their Leonard reactors. They always come out blurry because of the permittivity shift. It's like a double exposure. And I'm suggesting that these Sasquatch have a variable permittivity. And this gives them a lot of special features that ordinary matter doesn't have, including the ability to glide, generate huge amounts of EM fields. This is why people report their car batteries stalling in the presence of the Sasquatch, just when you want to get away. One of the Rusty Wilson stories is this woman that did sound recording, and she's with her partner, who's a former park ranger from Yellowstone. They're at the Boiling River in Yellowstone, and they're talking about the Yellowstone hum, and then they start hearing it. It's a hum that no one can explain, and it's heard around Bigfoot sometimes too. And they see this thing coming, and sparks are coming off it, and the guy faints, and she kind of pulls him back up to the car. He's sort of semi-conscious. It's generating strong EM fields. It's looking down into the window. The inside of the car is illuminated blue. She turns the key and nothing happens for quite a few minutes until all of a sudden it starts again. So you get these battery draining effects temporarily, battery interference effects, EM effects on cameras. So, and Tom DeLonge was one of the first people I saw suggest this. You look at one of his tweets from a couple of years ago. He said, maybe Bigfoot photos look blurry because Bigfoot is blurry, in caps, is blurry. Bigfoot is blurry because of this permittivity shift, in my view. And if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but that's my idea about it. So to go back to DJ's question, and you know what Rob's pointing out in a lot of you, I mean, these effects that we call paranormal, in my view, are fractal, non-ordinary, fractal, inward condensed electromagnetic fields that do not emanate in the same way as ordinary EM fields. They're from fractal, toroidal structures that, from the research, creates a highly intense field, but it's contained. And it still affects, through the Aronhoff-Bohm effect, it has effects on electronics and things around us. Even though if you were there with a Gauss meter or something, you would not necessarily measure a strong magnetic field. It has effects on energy potentials and so forth. You know, what's called vector potential, which is the Aronhoff-Bohm effect. So to sum it up, I mean, it doesn't affect us in a directly linear way, which normal electronics would measure and so forth, the way you could measure with meters. But it seems to create static charges. We often detected a lot of these static charges around crop circles. And if you sustain those and condense those, you're going to end up with a lot of really strange electromagnetic effects, by the way, which people point out happen around cold fusion Leonard reactors. I forget who the researcher was, but he said his credit cards would always be erased around some of these reactors and stuff, and batteries wouldn't work. It just sounds very familiar to me. So, yeah, and so it's Rob saying superconductivity. We're talking about a type of superconductivity. It's exactly what Wilhelm Weber, the word didn't exist back then. This is what he said would happen when you had particles really close. So in my view, anytime you get this type of compaction, and again, I'm not being like orthodox about this. There could be other explanations, but when you do get these types of compaction of particles, you're going to get ball lightning, you're going to get orbs, you're going to get superconductivity, and everything that goes with it. Camera failure, battery failure, mental confusion, cars not starting, time loss. You know, some of these stories, this was from one of the researchers. His name will come back to me in a moment. He was from Oklahoma. I mentioned him in the previous broadcast. I mean, he talked about a case where someone, you know, they heard the Sasquatch coming around the trailer side, and they hid in the bathroom with their dog with a knife to the door, thinking it was going to come in like some sort of horror movie, you know, because they can hear it coming in through the door, which they do sometimes. And all of a sudden, it's 5 hours later. It's 6 a.m. or something. And, you know, last thing he remembers, it was 1 a.m. And he's still standing there with the knife pointed towards the door. And the dog, the German Shepherd's still standing up next to him. And there, his arms aren't sore, you know, like it would have been if you were holding him out for 5 hours. It's just like time just blinked 5 hours ahead. And this is what we hear around UFO abductions and UFO sightings and all types of the creepy cryptids and everything. In Simeon's mind, these are all the same effects, just because it's my, you know, habit to just simplify things the way science does, which is to say it's not all these separate things, which is a more of a medieval outlook. Maybe it's like pantheism, where there's lots of gods for each effect. It's more of a monotheistic way of looking at it. I'm not saying I'm right, but unless we can show, I think we have to take the Einsteinian point of view here. Unless we can show these are separate phenomena, you have to assume that gravity and acceleration are the same thing. General relativity theory, E equals mc squared. And that's what I think is going on here. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but this is what I think it is we're dealing with the same fundamental effects in everything we call paranormal, be it ghosts, Sasquatch. Someone mentioned Jacques Vallée. I saw in the comments earlier. I mean, I talked to Jacques once about all this, and he told me that the classical UFO research was completely missing all these phenomena, which he knew existed because that's what the witnesses told him. And guess what happens with Bigfoot witnesses? This type of stuff we're talking about, the spookier stuff, gets edited out because the people that run some of these sites want them to just be flesh and blood creatures, and you don't want orbs and telepathy and time loss coming into it. So we haven't heard about that. It's just like Lance Orchard's book, Bigfoot of the Blues, where he talks about some of the weird effects that some of the people out in the watershed out there near Walla Walla, they experience some of this, and Jeff Meldrum sort of makes fun of that in one of his reviews of Bigfoot of the Blues. Said, oh, when they get into UFOs at the end, they go down the rabbit hole. But look, this is what the witnesses say they're experiencing. They experience this around ghosts, crop circles, portal areas, not just Skinwalker Ranch, all these other areas, the same sort of things happen there. I remember Ted Phillips, J. Allen Hynek's assistant, who did all those trace case analyses, like thousands of them. He's passed on recently, but he was talking at the Ozark UFO Festival, and he talked about Marley Woods in southern Missouri. And he said that one of these orbs came over a picnic table that was chained to the ground, had spikes in the ground to hold it down, and it floated off the ground as the orb came over it. I think that's the same effect when people say they see Bigfoot sort of gliding along the ground like that. It could be because they walk differently and their heads don't bob up and down. But and going back to DJ's question from a few minutes ago, and then we'll sum it up. It's been 2 hours, so thanks. When you hear people saying they see them go invisible, Brett Eichenberger, who created A Flash of Beauty, both of the movies, with his team, the Resonance Production, told me that he spoke to a cop that said that he saw a Bigfoot cross the road and he thought he was going to hit it and it vanished. Someone mentioned the predator effect before, just a shimmering images there, and it felt like going through a turbulence in an aircraft, like a bump. So when you hear all these encounters of them going invisible, I believe it. Is it easy to explain? No, not according to the classical science you and I were taught, but they left out Wilhelm Weber, and he was 24 years before Maxwell, okay? And he was talking about some of these kind of gravitational electromagnetic collapses. This is what Takeaki Matsumoto calls it. Electronuclear collapse. Hello, this is what Wilhelm Weber is talking about, the same thing. It's all electromagnetic. And when you get electromagnetic collapse, you get collapse of space-time as we know it, and weird stuff happens. Even possible connections to parallel realities, which would just be, other frequencies that are next to us that we normally don't perceive. It's not that hard to really understand. So that's my view of it. Let's get to a few questions. And then, guys, it's been a good long time, and I do appreciate you watching tonight. But I sort of wanted to share all this because these conferences were so interesting. And it's just like, if you don't go to these, you're never going to meet these people with these incredible stories of, I ran into someone there who had worked at DOE, with DOE and Lockheed inside the Beltway. He saw a flash of beauty, paranormal Bigfoot. I asked him, well, what did you think about what I said about all this coherent matter? I mean, I'm just a sociologist. He goes, oh, no, it made sense. This is totally, I'm really interested in this stuff. And this is someone that had worked in these areas in plasma physics. So when you get someone like that and they say, yeah, it makes sense what you're talking about, and they're plasma physicists, plasma expert, we know we're on the right path. But anyway, I guys, just as someone, I encourage you to read read on your own, come to your own conclusions. You don't have to believe what I'm saying here. This is my way of making sense of it. Because honestly, when I saw this weird stuff happening around crop circles, even the man-made ones, man, there's got to be other principles of electromagnetism that we weren't taught. Otherwise, our devices would not be going on the fritz over and over and over again. It just doesn't work the same way in crop circles a lot of the time. But I think it's the same sort of non-ordinary electromagnetic fields, fractal electromagnetic fields. So, to the questions. The ether from Rob. There is an ether, this is an interesting debate. What type of ether are we talking about? The electromagnetic field is one sort of ether. And the way the conventional explanation goes, the sense of a gaseous sort of ether permeating space was replaced by electromagnetic field, which sort of performs the same function. But I think if you look at the evidence for relic neutrinos from Alexander Parkhomov and some of the work at CERN and NASA, where they talk about these larger neutrinos streaming down on us all the time with gravitational and weak nuclear force effects, bosonic effects, they enhance reactions, biological and chemical reactions. If you look at the Parkhomov book, do I have it right here? Space Earth Human, he talks about this. I think that is a type of ether. It's a type of dark matter. I think dark matter is a type of ether. And I think this is, another big part of what we're talking about here. So thank you, guys. Any other questions here? DJ, I hope I answered your question. I mean, it's case closed for me. They go invisible. How do they do it? Frequency modulation. The whole subject of ball lightning is filled with this discussion of black ball lightning, stealth plasmas, as John Ramirez talked about in his interview with John Greenwald on the Black Vault. Stealth plasmas. He said they could see them coming in from space from the keyhole satellites, and they were invisible, but they were there in the infrared. So there are other states of matter. This is why, we talk about dark matter. There are other states of matter. Maybe it's a blow to the human ego that you don't see. They're there. We know they're there. Ken Shoulders talked about EVOs having invisible mode. Takeaki Matsumoto talked about these dark ball lightning. There is an invisible mode to plasmas and an invisible mode to coherent matter. And this is what I think cryptids and Bigfoot are capable of taking advantage of. Unless you've got another, simpler explanation than that. And I think Jules was talking about this a few seconds ago. You don't need a lot to create static. And if you can condense it some way through sound, they have these tremendous howls. People call it the howl from hell. You've heard it, that Ohio sound where it sounds like a air raid siren going up and all the way down. People who have been around it say it just penetrates into your organs. You feel everything vibrating. That type of cavitation can create exotic vacuum objects. Leonard researchers have created, there's one way to create cold fusion Leonard just through cavitation, just through sonic vibration. And so maybe Bigfoot is capable of creating that state of matter through vibration sound. In other words, maybe the howls are not just territorial the way we think of it. Maybe it has this clustering effect on matter to cavitate it, shake it enough to create exotic vacuum objects, microball lightning, and so forth. And they can sustain this in some way. I mean, people see them glowing. They often see their eyes glowing. You read these accounts. I read these accounts all the time, hear accounts of this. We had Barbara in our Bigfoot Zoom group, who Jules is a part of. And that's been going for a year now. Isn't that right? Yeah, we started it in November or last year or something. We had Barbara who saw this on the China Lake Naval Station doing archaeological research for the Smithsonian Institution with a bunch of 3 other guys, and something reached through the tent and touched her face, and she thought it was the other guy in the tent getting funny with her. And when they realized it wasn't him, They went out and they saw the tall 10-foot high Bigfoot with yellow glowing eyes. No moon. You hear this over and over. This is not reflecting light. They're generating light. How do they generate light like that? Because it seems from reports of people, we've had reports from special forces soldiers in Afghanistan, that they can see infrared, because when they point their scopes at them, which are emitting infrared light, the creatures put their hands up their eyes. Like, you and I can't see infrared light, but these creatures can. And it would seem that they're generating some sort of infrared, and seen in the dark, like someone mentioned Predator, like literally like the Predator movie, like they can see us like in that infrared spooky green spectrum. So Jules is saying, when I was a cheerleader, my pom-poms would cling to my hands from static electricity. Yeah, there you go, Jules. You're one of the original Evo girls, I would have to say. When you're generating static charges. It seems that all of this talk about exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters, itonic clusters, this is all a type of condensed static, because nobody really knows what static electricity is, and this is as good explanation as anybody. It's a type of coherent matter and charge separation. If the Sasquatch can create this through their hair, they run along the ground at these speeds, they could be generating other types of energy through charge separation. I think it's as good an explanation as anything else, okay? So in any case, folks, okay, it's been 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I appreciate all of you watching. This has been fascinating. Any other questions before we call it a night? I mean, I love this topic. I could talk about this all day. What cryptids have green eyes? The swamp creatures. Natalie. The more you read about this, the more types you realize are out there. I think these are types of dark matter, charge cluster based life forms, just based on the evidence. They have that invisibility factor, some of them. They've got different color glowing eyes. I've heard blue, I've heard red and white and yellow and green. I don't know. Why not? You can see why people don't talk about this very often. It's pretty, traumatic for some people to encounter any creature out there with glowing eyes. So, yes, the Evo girl. That's who you are, Jules. It was the static, and then they see the Bigfoot were attracted to you in Indiana, and that's why they brought you that wrench when you really needed it. Now, but I'm just sharing stuff that's already in the book, by the way, folks. Jules was so happy to share this. Yes, I think a great movie title. I'm sorry if the volume's low. I've got my mic here pretty close. So any other questions? I like to keep things short, folks. You know me, I like right to the point. I don't want to keep anyone. You've been very gracious with your time listening to this. I'm giving you my point of view. You don't have to believe it. You could come up with your own explanations for how Bigfoot go invisible. Dogman. By the way, I've heard other cases from other people, reputable people, about this happening with Dogman too. The car stalls just when you're trying to get away from the big werewolf. You may think it's you may think it's funny that werewolves actually exist, whatever you want to call them. I don't know, call them dogmen or dog women, whatever they are. People see these. Stan Gordon, I asked Stan about this in interviews. He thinks they're a variant of Bigfoot, okay? A more aggressive variant of Bigfoot, but they can be. So they often also cause cars to stall and so forth. So I think this could be a feature of some, cryptids means mysterious, unknown animals. Some of these cryptids, I think, have these abilities. But as we point out in The Flash of Beauty, Part 2, you have cuttlefish that can blend into their backgrounds, and octopus, and crustaceans can emit light too. I just think this is not a typical chemical creation of light. It's just the way that glow seems very sustained. If you look at photos of the people have taken of these eyes glowing, it seems to me just consistent with a type of controlled ball lightning effect, a controlled orb. Thank you, Edziu, for watching. Just keep an open mind. Don't believe it because I said it or anyone else. Do your own research, and together we'll figure this out together. Thanks, Mighty Tiger. Yeah, so this is the thing, Mighty Tiger. A lot of people scoffed at this. I can't tell you how many people I talked to who said they scoffed at it until they had their encounter. They were one of the people that laughed at this until it happened to them. And I have to tell you, there was a friend of mine, I've talked about her, from Arizona that visited me in Boulder while I was working on Dark Matter Monsters. And she told me later she was laughing at me inside without showing it. Oh, Simeon's one of these people that believe in these cryptids, Bigfoot, until she went back to Arizona. She's given me permission to talk about this generally, and saw the activity was happening right around her family's vacation condo in the Snowflake area of Arizona, Mangion Rim. Tree structures, the sounds at night, the weird wet dog smells that would come through the window, the howls, She would never, the big things put up in trees at right angles that she thought was the Forest Service, the tree structures thought that's Boy Scouts, until they were out there looking through the window at her, the Sasquatch. So it could happen to you. And the people who scoff, Mighty Tiger, those are the people that, I was never a scoffer. I was open-minded. I saw that film of the Patterson-Gimlin at a preview in a movie in the 70s as a teenager, so I was open to it. I just thought it was considerably more rare than it turned out to be, So, okay, sum it up. Winged humans. Who knows? I mean, you've seen those films, from Latin America. I saw a film at one of the UFO Congress presentations from someone from the military down there, somewhere way down in Latin America, and they showed us what they said were huge humanoids coming down in bubbles that they couldn't figure out what they were, and then going out over the ocean. And they showed us the video. It was pretty big. Brain injuries seem to increase paranormal abilities. Absolutely, because other parts of the brain take over, and we're all doing RV anyway, even if we don't realize it. So, happy holidays. Yes. So Natalie's asking. So Rob's answering Natalie's question. Yeah, it does seem people who've had brain injuries. Morehouse has talked about this. David Morehouse. So I'm talking about this in a video. People have had, hit by bullets when they've had their helmets on or something, and people falling off ladders. It increases RV ability. Something else takes over. There's also examples of people who do artwork. I had examples of this in Opening Minds of a woman that just started after she took RV. Doris from Colorado. She started drawing these beautiful soul portraits out of nowhere. She'd never done this before, and all of a sudden she's just drawing these beautiful pictures in here, and so other people like this. Yeah, this is her soul portrait of me. She had never drawn before, so the RV seems to it opens up some other parts of where people who've been ill, who've had strokes, often can tap into this. So. Yes, the Dogman, Egypt, Anubis, India. Yeah, they're around somewhere in a parallel reality. I mean, where are they when we don't see them? I just don't think you put your satellite over the forest. You could look really hard, you still won't see them. They show up in areas where people are. It's like they're there. It's hard to understand, but they're sort of there in another space. Enough people have encountered these. I wouldn't have believed in this a few years ago. I've heard too many witness accounts. Listen to Sasquatch Chronicles. Again, people are very reluctant to talk about this. But pay attention. Oh, trees are used as a portal. So that's what Ron Moorhead believes. Robbie's saying trees are used as a portal. Ron Moorhead thinks they come out of trees. Now, this is interesting. I talked to a nurse that I know. And someone asked where I am. I'm in Boulder, Colorado right now. I'm from New York originally. And I talked to a nurse recently in the Northwest, and she said she treated loggers. And one of them said what Ron said. This head would come out behind a tree like an ape-like human head, Sasquatch type. And they would go back there and there was nothing there. It's like, and the tree wasn't big enough to hide anything. It seemed like it came out of a tree. It's like some of these ghost photos where it just seems like it's coming out of something. It's weird. But, Ron Moorhead's one of the top witnesses I know about. He's encountered them multiple times and they seem to do this. So he only saw them once in the distance when they were down at the base camp near the road before they went up to the Sierra camp. He said he saw one just far away, but other times never. So, but you could hear them, and they're on the recording. The Sierra sounds. If you haven't heard the Sierra sound, folks, just put it in your search engine, and you can listen to them right now. They're on YouTube. It's definite conversation. And the funny thing is, Ron said, like that one between the male and the female Bigfoot, he often joked. They wondered what the conversation was about. It was like an argument, and it was like an argument who gets to go and eat the humans first, So, they're definitely arguing there. So finally, what I want to say about this, it's not flesh and blood versus woo, quantum woo, because everything is quantum. Everything's based on frequency. Everything's based on a multiple of Planck's constant. That's what physics tells us. Everything's a vibration. So it's not like this dichotomy between flesh and blood or quantum. Everything that's physical has a quantum component to it. A certain frequency, I forget what the formula is, just a function of wavelength and Planck constant. And so it's both. I mean, we're flesh and blood, but if you've taken RV, you've had any experience with anything like telepathy or clairvoyance, there's another aspect to it that seems to transcend just the sheer physicality of it, right? So in my view, you don't have to choose between flesh and blood. Sure, I've talked to people who've said, look, it's just flesh and blood for me. We've seen them in our area. They're just, a physical creature out there. Yeah, they have that ability, but there are other ones. There are different types of Sasquatch that seem to have a more etheric nature, can do the slip walking, can kind of go into other places that we can't follow them to, but they can come to our section of reality, our bandwidth. It seems something like that. So yeah, that's right, Rob. You should be a savant. All those injuries. Thank you for your service. Opening minds. That's really what it's all about, isn't it? So, well, anyway, folks, this has been a great discussion. I think you've been very generous to attend all of this. I'm glad we're able to share these experiences with you. But again, the main message here is believe your experience over what you are told by media or anybody else, even on YouTube now or any social media, because people always have interests in terms of what information they share. And what that means is there's a lot of bottlenecks with the flow of real, correct information. There's a huge number of bottlenecks with sharing information about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. We can see that obviously with the UFO subject. It's going through classified hearings in Congress, which, we're not really mostly hearing about. People I've talked to from UAP Task Force and so forth have said it's been going on since 2017, these classified hearings. But so it's not getting shared openly. And there's just different reasons why that happens. And it's on all sides. Witnesses are afraid of ostracism. Authorities don't want to look like they don't know what's going on. Law enforcement always says you saw a bear or a pack of dogs and you were traumatized. It's PTSD. You just saw dogs or a bear on two legs that had opposable thumbs and could howl and throw logs at your car. So we're the ones that have to do the research and communicate with each other and share the information. I think that's what we're doing. And so thanks for attending. So in any case, thanks very much, folks. Any last words here before we, let's see, anything we want to mention? So look for Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. It'll be on other platforms soon. I know people have written me saying I only watch on, Apple Movies or Amazon or somewhere. So for those of you that are like that don't want to go to Vimeo, let's see if we can just bring it up here. Oh yeah, here it is. let's see if we can share the screen one more time before we go. Yes, can you see that? So there is the movie page, and there's a trailer that you can watch, and you can rent or download. And anyway, you're going to want to see, if you're interested in what I talked about tonight, you are going to want to see this because it's such strong evidence in there of this other aspects of Sasquatch, which we've heard about, but here you have the witnesses telling you they've had the mental telepathy, they've seen them change into orbs, and a variety. The gifting. Toby Johnson gets into this quite a bit. The gifting relationship, so interesting. Where you leave stuff, start to leave things out for the Sasquatch. Maybe it's just apples or jars of peanut butter, and they leave crystals and flowers, or maybe mummified mice braided in meadow grass, stuff that they like, and that's their idea of a gift. So that's another interesting aspect of it. Now, you could be skeptical of it, but so many people have reported this over the years of a gifting relationship. I'm always hesitant to leave food out there for other creatures, but the only thing about the gifting relationship, there was a woman, a Robin, who was on one of these shows, one of these Sasquatch shows on YouTube. And I posted the link for our Bigfoot Zoom group. And Igor had talked about her, and she talked about having Igor come out to her place in Michigan. So what she said was, you really have to watch out leaving food for them, because if you don't do it one night, they're going to get ticked off. They're going to be there when you're back, and they're going to be grumpy. So it's sort of like, be careful about feeding them. And, you read these stories, and some people feel like they're trusted neighbors. They like having them around. They feel safer having them around. And there's all sorts of encounters out there that are the opposite. So just keep an open mind with this. And when you're outside and when you're in the woods, pay attention, okay? Just pay attention to what's going on. I'm not saying you have to be alarmed, but there are things that are seeing you. You may not see them, but they're out there. And inevitably, before people have these types of more negative encounters, they say they got this feeling of dread, like they should leave, and they didn't do it. So I spoke to someone around here in Boulder who had been at one of these areas up Granby, Colorado. He was in this campsite, and he just said the feeling got denser and denser, and feeling of dread. And this is what people report before some of these negative cryptid encounters. It's like, it's not just your survival instinct. It does kick in. To me, it's the structure of space-time is starting to change, and you can sense that. And he left. Nothing ever happened. He left before anything happens. And that's what you should do if you get those feelings, is just leave. It's not a total solution to some of these encounters, but you should pay. Remote viewers know what these feelings mean, and they don't argue with them as much. That, to me, that's one of the big benefits of RV, is you start trusting your gut feelings a little more. You get that feeling when you're hiking. I've had friends who've told me they've gotten that feeling just like they're being watched and so forth. That's sort of how it starts. So you may be going into their territory, and they may not feel like they want you there. I think that's part of what's going on here. And our friend from Arizona, who had this encounter, who was laughing at me originally, who encountered the Sasquatch, and it was like a horror movie. She left the condo without even turning out the lights, locking the door, bringing her laptop. That's how terrified she was. She thinks it'd be a good idea, and I'll just close with this, in national parks and forests, just to put up a Sasquatch icon or a carving, just to let people know this is a possibility, something you may encounter out there anywhere. It could just even be at the edge of town, but certainly in these parks and Forest Service areas, people encounter them. And if people just had this awareness, it was possible they might make better decisions. And of course, I have a petition on change.org, protect Bigfoot. If you go to change.org/protect Bigfoot, I have a petition up there for the federal government to just recognize that they exist, is to admit that they're real, instead of this ridiculous denial of the reality of this, at the kind of cover up, like a UFO cover up, but for cryptids. So go to change.org. This is my only sales message of the night. and sign to, I think it would be good to just officially recognize these exist. I think it would make it better in these back areas so people wouldn't have these encounters. So in case, one more question. Natalie, it's not on Amazon yet. I am told by the Resonant Production folks that it'll be on by the end of the year. It's just a distributor issue. Other people have had issues with, distributors, and it just can happen. So thanks, Denise, for watching it. Glad you liked it. I've seen it a couple times just because I've been there to answer questions afterwards. But every time I watched it with my mom the other day over Halloween back in New York, and I hear things there that I didn't hear the first time. It's one of those things that if you watch it multiple times, you'll see things in there that you didn't see the first time from the witnesses. And I really appreciate that crew for being open-minded. They did such a good job. I threw a lot of information into the film, and they did a very good job of keeping it there and being open to kind of a new way to look at this, in terms of coherent matter. So Jewel said, finally, you would receive mossy sticks, shells, and pretty rocks. Yeah, that's what they like. They like nature stuff. And So the final thing is there was another group there at Yakima, Discovery Legacy from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I missed their talk because I had to attend to an issue I was having in my car. But I talked to them later, and they have seen all sorts of activity in and around Lake Coeur d'Alene. So what their photo scrapbook looked like of these interesting tree structures, but they had been repeated miles apart. So this is the sort of thing you're looking for. It's really subtle. It may not be an obvious gift. Maybe it is crystals and mossy sticks and stuff. But it's just the possibility. We're hearing a lot about the idea that ETs could be around us. They could already be on Earth, non-human intelligence, the stuff we're hearing from, the folks that are involved with Congress right now. And but this is also true with life forms from Earth that have been here longer than we have. They've learned to do these. They've acquired these abilities to become invisible, to shift space and time. If you're around them, you could have time loss and things like this. And it's just amazing to me that we could have indigenous life forms right here on the Earth, not just from other places, but right here on the planet that could be right around us right now, and you're not even aware of them. They're either so good at hiding or shape-shifting, predator-like, like the movie, is what people describe they're seeing, this sort of shimmer that turns into a Bigfoot, or a Bigfoot that turns into this shimmering kind of heat-like waves that we've all seen over a road surface. That they're around us all the time, and we're kind of so dumbed down in some ways that we don't even know they're there. Or the people that do, it's like Flatland or something, the book I mentioned in Opening Minds in the beginning from the 1870s, where, it's like a flat Earth planet, and people don't want to admit there's anything three-dimensional because they live on a tabletop surface. That we're denying this. So it's as much a sociological and psychological topic as it is biology or physics, right? It has to do with our ability to deal with reality, and that it's more complex than the stories we've been told. And that there's other intelligent life forms from the Earth around us right now that in some ways are even more evolved than we are. In some aspects, they can do things that, we're good at building structures and musical instruments and, vehicles and Apple Watches, but they're good at, they don't need that stuff. They can communicate telepathically. They don't need houses. They can run 80 miles an hour and just go straight up cliffs and things. You and I can't do that. They're as strong as the strongest bodybuilder mixed with an Olympic athlete. All of them. That's just incredible. And then they can go invisible. And that's what Barb Shoop says in the movie Paranormal Bigfoot. She says, they have all those physical characteristics, and they can do this and this and this, and generate orbs and do things that we can barely even talk about. To me, that's incredibly fascinating, that it's been here all along, and we don't even publicly talk about it. And then we have these witness experiences. Jules here on the call being one of them who's seen them. And then it continued throughout Jewel's life, and she had UFO sightings. It kind of goes together. So it's just fascinating. And to me, in a world that has so much negativity to it sometimes, there's something incredibly amazing about this. And then it's sort of right out there. Maybe it's not your day to meet it or interact with it, but it's there, and it just says that there's just a lot of possibilities. So it's not just looking outside to the stars and ET civilizations. It's right back here on Earth. There are life forms that we don't even officially acknowledge yet. Not just Bigfoot, many different types. Talking at Forks to Tom Seawood, he told me about the final thing. He told me about the bugwas. What are the bugwas? They're the little people. Les Stroud talked about it on Survivor Man Bigfoot, but Tom said they're not Sasquatch, they're the little people. And people have seen these little beings around too. You hear descriptions of them sometimes. So it's almost like you and I are the ones in this flattened perception. It's like we're in a fishbowl and there's just a huge reality around this. And you can kind of go through life just seeing it from that narrow point of view. In our society, if you want to be a functional adult, you don't have to admit these things exist, but they're there. And sometimes they impinge on your reality, whether you like it or not. They may even walk through the wall sometimes, but officially we don't admit it exists. It's all like what Ingo Swann used to talk about, reality boxes. And that's the idea, is can we adapt our reality boxes to reality? Or are we going to stay in a little box? I think we're going to expand the box one way or another. Yeah, wonder. It's just amazing. So anyway, folks, feel free. We have a forum at the forum is superpowersbiomind.com. I kind of reversed Ingo's URL, and ours is superpowersbiomind.com. If you go to superpowersbiomind.com, it's free. Just join and share your stories. There's different sections. Jules is the moderator for superpowersbiomind.com. We use it for our remote viewing classes and our Bigfoot Zoom group, but we welcome you to come there and share your stories and experiences. There are lots of great stories up there that people have shared with their different encounters with different cryptids and different sorts of things. Life forms that are a little hard to describe, but they're up there. Superpowers Biomind Forum. So feel free to visit that to share any stories that you have. There's a whole huge section that's open, and you can just pick the category you want and share your experiences. So in any case, folks, thanks very much. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Okay, take care for now. And we'll see you soon. Take care and bye.